The late sun spilled over the hills of Bethlehem, like streams of golden honey pouring across the ripened barley fields. A dry wind rose from the Judean wilderness, carrying the taste of thirst. Yet in the lower valleys there lingered the fragrance of tender grass and the echo of sheep bleating. In this quiet setting, a young boy stood, hair glinting bronze under the fading light, a shepherd's staff in his hand, eyes bright as though they could pierce the heavens themselves. His name was David. Imagine yourself there. Among the gentle slopes, the flock scatters like flecks of white upon green. No engines roar, no city lamps glow, only the tender melody of a flute the boy lifts to his lips. Yet what you do not see is this. Inside the heart of this shepherd, God was preparing a king, a warrior, a poet, and a prophet for his people. Do you sense the paradox? A shepherd, the lowliest of tasks, ignored even within his own household, chosen by God to be a king. Why not a commander, a scholar, or a prince? Why would God look upon one who smelled of sheep and sweat? Because God does not see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks upon the heart. And David's story begins there. At that time, Israel trembled. King Saul, once chosen in hope, had faltered in obedience. Trumpets still blared in battle against the Philistines, but the king's faith wavered. The nation needed a new leader, but who could replace a king? In Bethlehem, in the house of Jesse of the tribe of Judah, the eyes of the Lord turned. The prophet Samuel was sent, carrying a horn of oil, instructed, "Among Jesse's sons, I have chosen one." Picture the moment. Jesse summons his eldest, Eliab, tall, broad-shouldered, commanding. Surely this must be the one, Samuel thought. Yet God whispered, "Not him." Man looks at appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then came Abinadab, then Shammah, then 4 more, each parading past the prophet, each rejected. Samuel's brow furrowed. "Are these all your sons?" Jesse hesitated. "There is still the youngest. He is tending the sheep." Still the youngest. Too small to mention. Forgotten in the fields. But the forgotten one was the chosen one. David was hurried in, robes smelling of pasture, dust clinging to his hands. As soon as Samuel saw him, the Spirit of the Lord stirred within. The horn was lifted. Oil poured, glistening across the boy's hair, dripping onto his brow, soaking into his tunic. And from that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Do you see the picture? A boy, surrounded by his brothers, bewildered eyes reflecting the holy fire of anointing. He could not yet grasp it, but the heavens had already shifted. History turned on that silent moment. But pause here. Have you ever felt forgotten? Like David, left outside, not even invited to the gathering. Maybe you've been told you are the least, the youngest, not important. Yet God often chooses the weak to shame the strong, the lowly to reveal his glory. If he saw a king in a shepherd boy, he sees divine potential in you. Life for David did not suddenly transform. He returned to the pasture. Nights beneath the stars, listening to wolves howl in the distance, heart pounding as the shadow of a lion crept close. Alone in the wilderness, no audience applauding, no chronicler recording. Yet there, God's training ground was shaping a warrior. A bear emerged one day, seizing a lamb. David's chest tightened, but he did not flee. Staff clenched, breath ragged, he pursued. The roar thundered in his ears, the stench of animal musk thick, claws tearing at the air. Yet David struck and rescued the lamb. Another time, a lion leapt, jaws flashing, and David seized it by the mane, pulling the prey from its mouth. Who witnessed these victories? No one. Only sheep and the silent gaze of heaven. But hidden battles forge open triumphs. Perhaps you too are fighting unseen battles, temptations in the night, fears that claw at your spirit, struggles no one applauds. Yet know this, God is shaping you in secret, so when the day comes, you will stand unshaken before giants. Meanwhile, in the royal courts, King Saul was unraveling. An evil spirit tormented him. Laughter faded, eyes grew haunted. Servants whispered, "Find someone who can play the harp, that when the king is troubled, music may bring relief." And they found David, a shepherd, yes, but also a musician, a psalmist, filled with God's Spirit. He was summoned into the palace. Can you imagine it? From rugged hills to marble halls, the same hands that once gripped a sling now caressed harp strings. Music rose like rivers of peace, and each time David played, Saul's torment eased, shadows lifted, calm returned. God was positioning David near the throne, though not yet as king. Here he would observe royalty, learn governance, witness both the strength and frailty of a ruler. Preparation often hides in unexpected places. Maybe God has placed you somewhere you did not expect. A job that feels menial, a role that feels too small. But don't despise the present. It may be the very stage where God is training you for what lies ahead. Then the day came. The Philistines gathered at the valley of Elah. On one slope, Israel's army encamped. On the opposite, the Philistines bristled with armor. Between them stretched a valley heavy with tension. And out stepped a giant, Goliath, nearly 10 feet tall, clad in bronze armor weighing more than a man could carry, his spear shaft thick as a weaver's beam. His voice rolled like thunder. Choose a man. Let him fight me. If he kills me, we will serve you. But if I prevail, you will serve us. Day after day, for 40 mornings and evenings, Goliath's challenge echoed across the valley. Israel's men trembled. Even Saul, tall and once courageous, shrank back. And in Bethlehem, Jesse said to his youngest, "Take this grain and these loaves to your brothers. Carry cheese to their commander. See how they are faring." David obeyed, bread in hand. But when he reached the camp and heard the giants roar, his heart ignited. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" David cried, "that he should defy the armies of the living God?" His brothers sneered. "Why are you here? Go back to those few sheep." But David's spirit burned with holy indignation. Have you felt it? When everyone says, "Be quiet. Don't stir trouble. You're too small." Yet something within you knows God is calling you to stand. Thus the story bent toward its turning point. A boy, without armor, without sword, only a shepherd's staff, a sling, and 5 smooth stones. Across the valley towered the giant, muscles bulging, weapons gleaming, voice rumbling like an earthquake. Every heartbeat of the crowd quickened. Every soldier held his breath. And the boy declared, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." The clash of destinies was about to begin. And what about you? Perhaps your Goliath is not a giant of flesh, but a shadow of fear, a sickness, a debt, or a despair that taunts you daily. You feel small, unprepared, weak. But remember, victory is not won by might, nor by sword, but by faith in the living God. David's sling is your faith. His stone is your prayer. His courage is your trust. The same God who stood with David stands with you. The valley of Elah trembled under the weight of silence. On one slope, Israel's army crouched, armor clattering with nervous tremors. On the opposite ridge, the Philistine host surged with laughter, their giant champion striding to the front, his bronze plates flashing like a second sun. Goliath raised his voice, a roar shaking the valley floor. "Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man. Let him fight me. If he kills me, we are yours. If I kill him, you are ours." The air thickened with fear. The very earth seemed to bow beneath his booming words. Israel's men glanced at one another, eyes wide with terror, hands trembling on their weapon. Day after day, morning and evening, the challenge rang out. And day after day, no man dared to step forward. But that day, a boy arrived at the edge of the camp. David. His hands carried bread and cheese, his task simple: deliver supplies and check on his brothers. Yet when his ears caught the thunder of Goliath's voice, his spirit ignited. "Who is this man?" David asked, "that he should defy the armies of the living God?" His brothers scolded him. "Why have you come down here? With whom did you leave those few sheep? We know your pride. You only came to watch the battle." But David's eyes, lit with fire, turned from them. "Is there not a cause?" Word of his boldness reached Saul, and David was summoned. Picture the scene: the great king upon his throne, armor glinting, face shadowed with anxiety. Before him stood a boy, unarmed, still smelling of pasture and dust. "Let no one lose heart," David said with quiet confidence. "I will fight him." Saul laughed bitterly. "You cannot. You are only a boy, and he has been a warrior since youth." But David stepped closer, eyes unwavering. "Your servant has tended his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep, I went after it. I struck it and rescued the lamb from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from this Philistine." The room fell silent. Saul searched the boy's face, perhaps hoping to glimpse fear, but instead he saw faith burning brighter than any soldier's courage. And finally, he said, "Go, and the Lord be with you." They dressed David in armor, Saul's own breastplate, Saul's own sword. But as the boy walked, the metal weighed him down. He shook his head. "I cannot go in these. I am not used to them." He removed the armor and laid it aside. Instead, he took what he knew: a sling, a shepherd's staff, 5 smooth stones from the brook, chosen with care, their weight familiar in his hand. He placed them into his pouch, gripped his sling, and stepped into the valley. The world seemed to hold its breath. Israel gasped. The Philistines roared with laughter. A child against a giant. A boy against a man of war. Goliath strode forward, eyes narrowing as he saw his opponent. Rage flashed across his face. Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks? He cursed David by his gods. Come here, and I will feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. But David's voice rose, strong and clear, echoing off the stone cliffs. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. The whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. The air shivered with tension. Goliath lunged forward, steps like earthquakes. David ran swiftly toward him, sling whirling, leather straps slicing the air. A stone flew, small, sharp, ordinary, but guided by God. Time seemed to freeze. The pebble cut through the giant's laughter, pierced the space between helmet and brow, and sank deep. Goliath's eyes widened, his voice choked, his massive body crumbled. The earth quaked as he fell face down, dust exploding around him. Silence. Then a cry. Israel roared as hope surged like fire. David sprinted forward, seized the giant's own sword, and with one final stroke, ended the terror that had paralyzed a nation. The Philistines fled, their boasts collapsing with their champion. Israel's soldiers, once trembling, now surged with courage, pursuing their enemies across the valley. Victory, born not of strength or strategy, but of faith in the living God. Pause here. What is your Goliath? What looms over you, taunting, mocking, making you feel small? Maybe it's a diagnosis, a broken relationship, an addiction, or a fear you cannot name. It shouts, you will never win. You will never overcome. But listen, the battle is the Lord's. David's sling was simple, but his faith was mighty. Your sling may be prayer, perseverance, or a single step of obedience. Whatever it is, when placed in God's hands, it becomes enough to topple giants. Do not despise the stone in your hand. Do not underestimate the faith in your heart. God can use what seems small to accomplish what is impossible. David returned from the battle with the head of Goliath in his hand. The people cheered, their voices echoing like thunder through the hills. Women sang, tambourines in hand. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. But in the midst of joy, a shadow stirred. Saul's heart, once relieved, twisted with jealousy. His eyes darkened as he watched the boy receive the praise he craved. A seed of envy took root, one that would grow into hatred, betrayal, and pursuit. For now, though, David stood as Israel's hero, the shepherd boy who felled a giant, the youth who brought courage back to a nation. But his journey had only begun. Ahead lay trials greater than Goliath, suspicion, exile, betrayal, and the long road to the throne. And through it all, the question would echo, will David trust the God who anointed him? And you, will you? When victory comes, will you stay humble? When jealousy rises against you, will you keep your eyes on God? When the road stretches long, will you still believe? The God who gave David victory over Goliath is the same God who stands with you today. Giants fall, faith rises, and history changes when one heart dares to trust him fully. The song of victory still echoed through Israel's hills. Women danced with tambourines, their voices weaving melodies of joy. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Children repeated the chant. Farmers in the fields whispered the name David with awe. The nation, long suffocated by fear, breathed again. But in Saul's heart, the music soured. Each word of praise for David struck him like a blade. Jealousy gnawed at his soul. He clenched his fists, eyes narrowing. They credit David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? From that day, Saul's gaze toward David darkened. At first, he masked his envy. David had become a fixture in the palace, beloved harpist, victorious warrior, now captain over 1,000 men. He went out and came in before the people with wisdom, and everything he touched prospered because the Lord was with him. Israel loved David. Even Saul's son, Jonathan, felt his heart knit to David's in a bond stronger than brotherhood. Jonathan stripped off his robe, his armor, even his sword, and gave them to David. Imagine the weight of that gesture. The prince, heir to the throne, laying down his symbols of power and choosing friendship over rivalry. Jonathan saw in David not a threat, but God's chosen one. He loved him as his own soul. But Saul's spirit was restless. When David played the harp to soothe him, Saul's jealousy boiled over. Twice he hurled his spear at David. Twice David dodged, the weapon thudding into the wall. The palace grew tense, whispers spreading. Was the king losing his mind? Saul devised another plan. If his spear could not strike David, perhaps the battlefield would. He offered his daughter Merab in marriage, if David would prove himself in war. Yet when the time came, Merab was given to another. Then Saul offered Michal, his younger daughter. This time, it was genuine, for Michal loved David. But Saul's heart was twisted. Let the Philistines' hand be upon him, he thought. The bride price Saul demanded was outrageous, 100 foreskins of the Philistines. A dangerous, humiliating task meant to seal David's doom. Yet David did not flinch. With courage burning, he and his men struck down 200 Philistines, doubling the king's demand, laying the grisly tokens before Saul. Saul's plan backfired. Instead of shame, David's fame soared. He married Michal, and the people loved him all the more. Saul's fear grew. He knew the Lord was with David and had departed from him. Imagine David in this season. One moment, adored by the crowds. The next, hunted in the shadows. He could hear the clash of praise and the hiss of jealousy all around him. The throne was promised to him by God, yet he lived under the reign of a king who wanted him dead. Have you ever felt the tension of being in between? The promise spoken over your life shines bright, but the reality you walk in feels dark, confusing, even hostile. David lived in that in-between for years, learning to trust God's timing rather than grasp the crown too soon. The breaking point came one night. Saul's rage boiled beyond containment. In the stillness of the palace, he ordered, "Kill David in the morning." But Michal, hearing the plot, rushed to her husband. If you do not run tonight, tomorrow you will be dead. Picture the scene. Darkness cloaked the city. Michal lowered David through a window, his feet touching the ground silently. He slipped into the night, the cool air stinging his face, every heartbeat hammering with urgency. Behind him, his wife laid a decoy in his bed, goat's hair for his head, blankets arranged to trick the guards. When Saul's men entered at dawn, they struck the blankets, only to find no David. Fury burned in Saul's eyes. The hunter had missed his prey. From that moment, David became a fugitive. He fled to Samuel in Ramah, seeking refuge with the old prophet. Together they went to Naioth, where a company of prophets worshipped. But Saul, relentless, sent men after him. Yet each group that arrived was overcome by the Spirit of God, falling into prophetic ecstasy instead of violence. Finally, Saul himself came, only to be stripped of his dignity, prophesying day and night. Even in pursuit, God displayed his power, showing that no scheme of man could thwart his will. But David knew better than to linger. He slipped away again, finding Jonathan. Under the shadow of the fields, the two friends wept together. "What have I done?" David pleaded. "Oh, why does your father seek my life?" Jonathan, torn between loyalty to his father and love for David, devised a plan. At the new moon feast, Jonathan would test Saul's intentions. If anger flared when David's seat was empty, Jonathan would signal danger with arrows shot in the field. And so it was. Saul's rage exploded, even against his own son. He hurled his spear at Jonathan, cursing him for siding with David. Jonathan's heart broke, for he knew the truth. David must flee. The morning sun rose. David waited in the field, hidden among stones. Jonathan, with heavy steps, loosed the arrows beyond him. The signal was clear: danger. When the servant departed, David emerged. The two embraced, faces wet with tears. Jonathan whispered, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship in the name of the Lord," saying, "The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and mine forever." They parted. Jonathan returned to the palace. David stepped into the wilderness, no longer a hero welcomed by crowds, but a fugitive hunted by his king. Think of this moment. The giant was behind him. The victory songs had faded. Ahead lay caves, hunger, betrayal, and years of exile. What do you do when yesterday's triumph turns into today's trial? When the path to your promise winds through valleys of despair? David's story teaches us this: faith is not forged in victory alone. It is refined in hiding, in waiting, in trusting when the promise feels most distant. Maybe you are in such a season. Once, life was bright with victories. Now, you feel chased by shadows. But do not despair. If God anointed David in Bethlehem, if he delivered David in the valley of Elah, he would also preserve David through the wilderness. And the same God will keep you through your in-between. The wilderness became David's refuge and his crucible. No longer could he walk freely through cities. No longer could he play the harp in Saul's courts. Now, he was a wanderer, a man with a price on his head. Yet the very caves and deserts that seemed barren became holy classrooms, where David learned dependence upon God alone. He first fled to Nob, where the tabernacle stood. Hungry, desperate, he came to Ahimelech the priest. His voice was low, weary. "Do you have bread?" The priest hesitated. Only the consecrated bread was there, the bread of the presence, set before the Lord. Yet in mercy, Ahimelech gave it to David. He also handed him the sword of Goliath, once a symbol of terror, now a token of God's deliverance. Imagine the weight of that weapon in David's hand, a reminder of God's past faithfulness as he faced present fear. But even there, danger stalked him. Doeg the Edomite, Saul's servant, watched the exchange with cold eyes. Betrayal brewed in silence. David moved on, slipping further into exile. He sought shelter among the Philistines in Gath, the very land of Goliath. But whispers spread. Isn't this David? The one they sing about? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands? Fear gripped him. If the Philistines remembered his victories, they would kill him. So he disguised himself, scratching marks on the doors, letting saliva run down his beard, feigning madness before King Achish. Laughter and mockery spared his life. Can you feel the humiliation? The boy who slew the giant now drooling like a fool to escape death. Yet even in disgrace, God preserved him. Sometimes survival does not look glorious, but it is still God's hand at work. David retreated to the cave of Adullam. Alone at first, he poured his heart into psalms that still breathe today, cries of despair, whispers of trust, songs of refuge. And slowly, others gathered to him, his brothers, his father's household, then men in distress, in debt, discontented, 400 in all, drawn to the fugitive shepherd. The forgotten became a leader of the broken. Isn't this how God works? From caves, he raises captains. From outcasts, he shapes armies. And in your lowest places, he may be gathering people you never expected, souls who see in your scars a leader who understands. Even as David hid, Saul raged. Doeg betrayed him, telling Saul of the bread and sword given at Nob. In wrath, Saul ordered the slaughter of the priests of the Lord. 85 men fell that day, their blood staining holy ground. Only Abiathar escaped, carrying the ephod to David. Together, they wept. David bore the weight of guilt, whispering, "I am responsible for the death of your father's house. Stay with me. With me you will be safe." David was learning the bitter cost of leadership, not only triumph, but tragedy carried on his shoulders. One night, word reached David. The Philistines were raiding Keilah, stealing grain from threshing floors. He inquired of the Lord, and God answered, "Go, attack the Philistines and save Keilah." His men hesitated. "We are afraid here in Judah. How much more if we go to Keilah against the Philistine forces?" But David asked again, and the Lord confirmed. So David led them, struck down the Philistines, and delivered the town. Yet even in victory, betrayal threatened. When Saul heard David was in Keilah, he marched to trap him. David asked the Lord, "Will the citizens of Keilah surrender me?" And God answered, "They will." Think of that sting. The very people he rescued would betray him to save themselves. Sometimes even your victories are not safe havens. So David slipped away with his men, wandering into the wilderness once more. Saul pursued relentlessly, searching hills and ravines, determined to destroy him. Yet Jonathan found David in Horesh, strengthening his hand in God. "Do not be afraid," Jonathan said. "My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father knows this." What a friendship. In a world of jealousy, Jonathan chose loyalty. In a palace of rage, Jonathan chose peace. Their covenant became a beacon in the storm, a reminder that even in exile, God provides companions who refresh our faith. Do you have such a friend? Or perhaps, are you called to be that friend for someone else, standing beside them when the world turns against them? The chase tightened. David moved into the wilderness of Ziph. The Ziphites, hoping to curry Saul's favor, betrayed his hiding place. Saul closed in, his forces nearly surrounding David. Dust rose as soldiers pressed from all sides, and David's men braced for the end. But suddenly, a messenger reached Saul. "Come quickly. The Philistines are raiding the land." At the very edge of capture, God intervened. Saul turned back, abandoning the pursuit. David's life, once again, hung by a thread of divine timing. The place was named the Rock of Escape, a monument to God's deliverance. But perhaps the most defining test came in the cave of En-Gedi. Saul, chasing David with 3,000 chosen men, entered a cave to rest, unaware that David and his men were hidden deep inside. "Now is your chance," David's men whispered. "The Lord has delivered your enemy into your hand." Creeping forward in the darkness, David's knife glimmered. He cut off the corner of Saul's robe, then pulled back. But his heart smote him. Even touching the king's garment felt like rebellion against God's anointed. He turned to his men. "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed. I will not lift my hand against him." When Saul left, David followed at a distance. From the mouth of the cave, he called out, "My lord, the king." Saul turned, startled. David bowed low, the fragment of robe in his hand. "See, my father, look at this piece of your robe. I cut it off but did not kill you. I have not wronged you, yet you hunt me down. May the Lord judge between us, but my hand will not touch you." Saul's heart broke for a moment. Tears filled his eyes. "You are more righteous than I," he admitted. "I know you will surely be king." But though Saul's words softened, his jealousy did not die. The chase would continue. Yet in that cave, David revealed the heart of a true king, one who trusts God's timing, refusing to seize the throne by force. Think of this. What corners of Saul's robe lie in your hand? What shortcuts tempt you to grasp what God has promised, instead of waiting for his timing? David could have ended his exile that day, but he chose trust over expedience. And in doing so, he left us a lesson. It is better to wait on God's promise than to force our own crown. The wilderness shaped David into more than a fugitive. It forged him into a man after God's own heart. But exile was long, and hunger gnawed. Shadows of betrayal haunted him. At every turn, Saul's pursuit was relentless. Yet the Lord's hand never left him. News spread again. Saul was searching with 3,000 chosen men. This time, They camped in the wilderness of Ziph, tents scattered across the hills, fires flickering like stars on the ground. David, hidden among the ridges, looked down at the camp. His enemy lay within reach. So he asked, "Who will go down with me into the camp of Saul?" Abishai, nephew of David, fierce and loyal, stepped forward. "I will go with you." Picture it. Night cloaked the valley. The camp slept. Shadows stretched long under the pale moon. David and Abishai crept silently past rows of slumbering soldiers. Breath shallow, every twig underfoot a threat. At the heart of the camp lay Saul, asleep, his spear stuck into the ground by his head, a jug of water beside him. Abner, the commander, slept nearby. Abishai's hand tightened on his sword. "Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't strike him twice." But David shook his head firmly. "Do not destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives, the Lord himself will strike him, or his time will come, or he will fall in battle. But I will not raise my hand against the Lord's anointed." Instead, David reached down, lifted the spear and the jug of water, and slipped back into the night. From a safe distance, atop a hill, David called out. His voice pierced the silence of dawn. "Abner, you are a man, are you not? Why did you not guard your lord the king? Look where the king's spear and water jug are." Saul awoke, recognized David's voice, and cried, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" David answered, "Why does my lord pursue his servant? What have I done? What wrong is in my hand? May the Lord consider my cause and deliver me from your hand." Saul's heart softened again. "I have sinned. Return, my son David. I will not harm you again, because you considered my life precious this day." David placed the spear far away, refusing to return. He knew Saul's words shifted like sand, but once more, he had proven his heart, a king in spirit, though crownless in body. Do you see the pattern? Twice David spared Saul. Twice he refused to seize the crown by force. Faith is not only courage in battle, it is patience in waiting. Sometimes the hardest victory is not over giants, but over the urge to take matters into your own hands. Are you tempted to grasp what God has promised before it's time? David's restraint reminds us, trust God's timing. The throne gained by violence is fragile, but the throne given by God endures forever. Yet life in exile wore heavy. David sought refuge again with the Philistines. Achish, king of Gath, gave him Ziklag as a dwelling place. There, David and his men lived for 16 months, raiding enemies of Israel's borders while maintaining uneasy peace. It was a season of survival, a time of ambiguity. But far away, storm clouds gathered. The Philistines prepared for war against Israel. David, entangled in his alliance, was expected to march with them. How could the anointed king of Israel lift a sword against his own people? Yet God spared him from this impossible choice. The Philistine commanders, mistrusting him, sent him away. And when David returned to Ziklag, devastation awaited. Smoke rose into the sky. The Amalekites had raided, burned the city, and taken captive the women and children. David's wives were gone. His men wept until no strength remained. Bitterness turned toward David. Talk of stoning him filled the air. In that crushing moment, when all seemed lost, David did something profound. He strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Not in men, not in weapons, not in circumstances, only in God. He inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" And the Lord answered, "Pursue them. You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue." So David set out. Along the way, they found an abandoned Egyptian slave, weak with hunger. Fed and revived, he revealed the Amalekites' camp. Guided by providence, David struck them by night, rescued every captive, recovered every possession, and claimed spoils besides. From ashes, God brought restoration. Pause here. What has the enemy stolen from you? Joy, peace, relationships, hope. Like Ziklag, perhaps you look at the ruins of something precious and wonder if it can ever be restored. Hear this. The same God who gave David strength in despair can restore what you have lost. The story is not over. The ashes are not the end. While David was recovering all, Saul was facing his end. On Mount Gilboa, Israel clashed with the Philistines. Arrows found Saul. His sons, including Jonathan, fell beside him. Despairing, Saul fell upon his own sword. The king who once stood tall ended in tragedy, separated from the Spirit of God. News traveled quickly. A messenger brought word to David. Saul was dead. Jonathan too. David tore his clothes, his men with him, and they wept until evening. He lifted a lament, a song that still echoes, "How the mighty have fallen." O Jonathan, you were slain on your high places. I grieve for you, my brother Jonathan. You were very dear to me. Your love was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war have perished. Think of this paradox. Saul, his enemy, lay dead. The crown was nearer than ever. Yet David's heart was not triumph, but grief. He mourned Saul as God's anointed, and Jonathan as his soul's companion. True greatness is not only in victory, but in compassion, even for those who wronged you. David's tears over Saul teach us, bitterness does not build kingdoms. Mercy does. And so, the stage was set. The fugitive would soon rise to the throne. The boy who tended sheep, who slew giants, who wandered caves, who wept in ruins, now stood on the edge of destiny. But his journey as king would bring new trials, tests of justice, temptation, and humility before God. And the question remains, would David, crowned at last, still remain a man after God's own heart? The crown no longer lingered in the shadows of prophecy. Saul was gone. Jonathan, too. Israel was fractured, wounded by war, uncertain of its future. And David, the fugitive shepherd, now stood at the threshold of kingship. After Saul's death, David did not rush to seize the throne. Instead, he sought the Lord. In the quiet of prayer, he asked, "Shall I go up to the towns of Judah?" And the Lord answered, "Go up." "Where shall I go?" David pressed. "To Hebron," came the reply. So David went up, bringing with him his wives, his men, and their households. In Hebron, the men of Judah gathered and anointed him king over the house of Judah. Not all Israel yet, just a tribe, just a beginning. But it was God's chosen path. Meanwhile, the house of Saul was not ready to fade. Abner, Saul's commander, crowned Ishbosheth, Saul's son, as king over the rest of Israel. The nation split, Judah under David, Israel under Saul's son. 7 years of tension, of civil strife, of brothers against brothers. Yet through those years, David did not grasp at power. He waited. He strengthened his house. Sons and daughters were born to him in Hebron. The Lord prospered him. Abner, once Saul's fiercest loyalist, eventually turned toward David. Quarrels with Ishbosheth soured his allegiance, and he sent word, "Make a covenant with me, and I will bring all Israel over to you." David agreed. But before peace could blossom, Abner was murdered by Joab in vengeance. Tragedy and blood mingled with the fragile hope of unity. David grieved. He walked behind Abner's bier, weeping openly. The people saw his sincerity, and their hearts turned more toward him. Slowly, painfully, God was knitting the nation together under David's hand. Finally, Ishbosheth fell, struck down by assassins seeking David's favor. They brought his head to David, expecting reward. But David, outraged, declared, "How much more? When wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own house on his own bed, shall I not now require his blood at your hand?" And he ordered their execution. Justice, not ambition, guided David's steps. His rise to power was not built on treachery, but on trust in the Lord. Then came the moment of fulfillment. Representatives from all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron. They said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler.' So the elders anointed David king over all Israel. At last, the shepherd boy was crowned shepherd of a nation. 30 years old he was when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years, 7 in Hebron, 33 in Jerusalem. But before the throne could be secure, the capital must be established. Jerusalem, still held by the Jebusites, stood as a fortress on Mount Zion. The inhabitants scoffed, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." Yet David captured the stronghold. He called it the City of David. From that day, Jerusalem became not only his seat of power, but the heart of a nation, the city chosen by God. Can you picture it? The Ark of God, still dwelling in obscurity, would one day come to this city. The Psalms of David would rise from its walls. And from this hill, the Messiah himself would reign forever. David grew stronger and stronger, for the Lord Almighty was with him. Hiram, king of Tyre, sent cedar logs and craftsmen to build David a palace. The once forgotten shepherd now dwelled in royal splendor. But David knew the true strength of his reign was not palaces or armies. It was the presence of God. And so, his heart longed for the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's dwelling among his people, to rest in Jerusalem. With joy, David gathered 30,000 chosen men. The ark was set on a cart, drawn by oxen. Music filled the air, lyres, harps, tambourines, cymbals, trumpets. David and all Israel danced before the Lord with all their might. But suddenly, tragedy struck. At the threshing floor of Nachon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark. In an instant, he fell dead. Fear gripped David. Celebration halted. He cried out, "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" The ark was left in the house of Obed-Edom, and there, blessing poured upon his household. When David heard of it, courage returned. He prepared again, this time with reverence. Sacrifice after 6 steps, shouts of joy, trumpets sounding, and David, clothed in a linen ephod, danced with abandon before the Lord. Unashamed, unrestrained, he leapt and whirled, declaring that no dignity was greater than worship. Michal, Saul's daughter, watched from a window, despising him in her heart. But David declared, "I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this." That day, the ark entered Jerusalem, and David placed it in a tent he had prepared. Bread, meat, and cakes of raisins were given to every household. The city rejoiced. God was at the center again. Think of this. What is your ark? What place in your life needs God's presence restored? David understood that no throne, no palace, no crown meant anything without the presence of God. And so it is with us. What good is success without God? What value is victory without His presence? That night, as David rested in his cedar palace, he looked at the tent that housed the ark. His heart stirred. Here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent. He longed to build a temple, a dwelling for the Lord. But God sent a word through the prophet Nathan. "Are you the one to build me a house? I have never dwelt in a house, from the day I brought Israel up out of Egypt to this day. Instead, I moved from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Did I ever ask? Instead, the Lord declares to you, the Lord will build a house for you. When your days are over, I will raise up your offspring, and I will establish his kingdom. Your throne will be established forever." David wept. The shepherd who wanted to build a house for God was promised something greater, that through his line would come an eternal king, the Messiah, the son of David, whose reign would never end. Pause here. What dreams have you had to lay down? David longed to build the temple, but God gave that task to another. Instead, God gave him something eternal. Sometimes, the no you hear from God is not rejection but redirection, because he has a greater yes waiting. David's dream was to build a house for God. God's dream was to build an eternal kingdom through David. From Hebron to Jerusalem, from caves to palaces, from exile to crown, David's story now turned toward the tests of kingship, justice, temptation, failure, and repentance. The boy who killed giants would now face battles within his own soul. And through it all, the question would remain, could he still be a man after God's own heart? The city of David pulsed with new life. Israel was united, Jerusalem was secure, and the ark of God rested in the heart of the nation. From the shepherd fields of Bethlehem to the cedar halls of the palace, David's journey had been long, but his throne was established. He ruled with justice, his name revered, his victories sung across the land. And yet, the higher the throne, the greater the tests. Giants of flesh had fallen, but now giants of desire, pride, and temptation would rise. One evening, when kings normally went out to war, David remained in Jerusalem. From the rooftop of his palace, the city stretched beneath him. Lanterns glowed in the courtyards, fires flickered in hearths, and faint laughter drifted through narrow streets. But his eyes wandered and fell upon a woman bathing, Bathsheba. Her beauty was undeniable. The moment lingered too long. Curiosity became desire, and desire birthed decision. He sent messengers. She came. And what began as a glance became a sin that would ripple through generations. Bathsheba returned with news that pierced David's heart. She was pregnant. Panic stirred. To conceal his sin, David summoned her husband, Uriah the Hittite, from the battlefield. He urged him, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." But Uriah, faithful soldier, refused. The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? Even in loyalty, Uriah's words exposed David's deceit. So David plotted darker. A letter was sent to Joab, sealed with the king's hand. In it, David wrote, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die." And so it was. Uriah fell on the battlefield, never knowing he carried the death sentence penned by his king. Bathsheba wept. David brought her into his house as his wife. To the world, the matter seemed hidden. But before God, it was wide open. The prophet Nathan came to David with a parable. There were two men in a certain town, one rich and one poor. The rich man had many sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb. He raised it. It grew up with him and his children, sharing his food, drinking from his cup, sleeping in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. One day, a traveler came to the rich man, but instead of taking one of his own sheep, he took the poor man's lamb, killed it, and prepared it for his guest. David burned with anger. As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay fourfold, because he did such a thing and had no pity. Nathan's eyes locked on David. His voice thundered, "You are the man." Silence fell like judgment. Nathan declared the word of the Lord. "I anointed you king. I delivered you. I gave you the house of Israel. And if that had been too little, I would have given more. But you despised my command and took Uriah's wife. Therefore, the sword will never depart from your house." David's heart shattered. He fell, whispering, "I have sinned against the Lord." And Nathan replied, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die, but the child born to you will." The baby grew sick. For 7 days, David fasted, lying on the ground, refusing food. He wept, pleading for mercy. But on the 7th day, the child died. David rose, washed, changed his clothes, and went into the house of the Lord to worship. His servants were astonished. While the child was alive, you fasted and wept. But now he is dead. You rise to eat. David answered, while the child was alive, I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious. But now he is dead. Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me. Out of ashes, mercy bloomed again. Bathsheba bore another son, and the Lord loved him. Nathan named him Jedediah, beloved of the Lord. His name we know as Solomon, the one who would build the temple. From sin and sorrow, God still wove redemption. Pause here. David's story is not whitewashed. His psalms soar with worship, but his sins bleed with pain. Why does Scripture reveal his failure so openly? To remind us that even those after God's heart stumble. But it also shows us this: repentance is the path back to God. Perhaps you carry guilt, choices you regret, sins you've tried to bury. David's cry in Psalm 51 is the cry for us all. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. God does not despise a broken spirit. He restores the repentant. Yet the prophecy of Nathan proved true. The sword would never depart from David's house. Strife rose among his sons. Amnon, one of David's sons, defiled his half-sister Tamar. Absalom, Tamar's brother, burned with fury and later avenged her by killing Amnon. Blood stained the family of the king. And Absalom's heart turned further, whispering rebellion against his father. The shepherd king, once fugitive of Saul, would now become fugitive of his own son. Think of this: giants fall, kingdoms rise, but the fiercest battles are often within our own households, within our own hearts. David's life reminds us, even forgiven sin can leave scars. But even scarred lives can still carry the story of grace. The palace, once filled with music and laughter, grew heavy with tension. The sins of David's house bore bitter fruit, and the prophecy spoken by Nathan unfolded before his eyes. Absalom, the son of David and Maacah, was handsome beyond compare. From the crown of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. His long hair, thick and radiant, was the pride of Israel. Yet beneath his beauty simmered vengeance and ambition. It began with grief. Tamar, Absalom's sister, had been defiled by Amnon, David's eldest son. David was furious but did nothing. Silence rotted the air. Absalom, enraged and protective, bided his time. For 2 years he nursed his anger, feeding it in secret. Then, during a feast, he struck. Amnon was slain at Absalom's command. Blood cried out in the palace. David wept for his sons, for the one dead, and the one who fled. Absalom escaped to Geshur, the land of his grandfather, and there he remained 3 years. But David's heart longed for him. Though Absalom had spilled blood, he was still David's child. Joab, discerning the king's turmoil, devised a plan. Through a wise woman of Tekoa, he told a parable that stirred David's mercy. At last, the king allowed Absalom to return to Jerusalem. Yet the reunion was not full. For 2 years, Absalom lived in the city without seeing his father's face. Frustration gnawed at him. He sent for Joab, demanding audience. When Joab ignored him, Absalom set Joab's field ablaze to gain his attention. Bold, reckless, unyielding, that was Absalom. Finally, David summoned him. Absalom bowed, his face to the ground. The king kissed him. Reconciliation seemed restored. But in Absalom's heart, rebellion was already growing. He rose early, standing at the gate, intercepting those who came to seek the king's judgment. With charm and flattery he whispered, "Your claims are good and right, but there is no one appointed by the king to hear you. If only I were judge in the land. Everyone with a complaint would come to me, and I would see that he gets justice." He stole hearts, one by one. Israel's loyalty shifted. Slowly, deliberately, Absalom built a following. He prepared chariots and horses, not 50 men to run before him. And after 4 years, he declared his move. "I must fulfill a vow in Hebron," he told his father. David, unaware, permitted him. But in Hebron, Absalom proclaimed himself king. Trumpets sounded. Messengers spread the cry, "Absalom is king in Hebron." The rebellion ignited. David, warned of the tide turning against him, made a bitter decision. He would not stay in Jerusalem and see the city bathed in blood. He gathered his household, his loyal men, and fled. Barefoot, weeping, head covered in grief, the once mighty king walked out of the city he had conquered. Imagine it. The king who had slain giants now slipping away like a hunted deer. Citizens lined the roads, some loyal, some gloating. As he climbed the Mount of Olives, his tears fell to the ground. His own son sought his throne. Have you ever known betrayal by one you love most? The cut of a stranger's blade is deep, but the wound of family pierces the soul. David bore that agony, yet even in despair, he lifted his voice. "O Lord, I cry aloud, and he answers me from his holy hill. I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side." On the road, Shimei, a man of Saul's house, hurled stones and curses. "Get out, you man of blood. The Lord has repaid you for the blood of Saul's house. Now the kingdom is given to your son Absalom." Abishai raged, hand on his sword. "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me cut off his head." But David restrained him. "Leave him. If he curses because the Lord told him, who can ask, 'Why do you do this?' Perhaps the Lord will look upon my affliction and repay me with good for the cursing I received today." Even in humiliation, David humbled himself under God's hand. He trusted not in vengeance, but in the justice of the Lord. Meanwhile, Absalom entered Jerusalem. He sat upon the throne, reveling in power. He sought counsel from Ahithophel, once David's trusted adviser, whose wisdom was esteemed as though one had consulted the word of God. But within the palace, another counselor worked quietly, Hushai, David's friend, who remained loyal and offered himself as a spy. God wove his providence into the threads of betrayal and deception. The battle came at last in the forest of Ephraim. David's men prepared, but the king, heart torn, commanded, "Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom." He could not forget that beneath the crown of rebellion was still his son. The clash thundered through the woods. 20,000 fell that day. The forest itself devoured more than the sword. And Absalom, riding his mule, passed under the branches of a great oak. His hair, thick and heavy, caught in the branches. The mule kept going. Absalom hung suspended, helpless. Joab, disregarding David's plea, thrust 3 javelins into his heart. His men struck him down, and they cast him into a pit, covering him with stones. News ran to David. He waited at the gate, straining for word. A messenger came. "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man." David's heart shattered. He climbed to his chamber above the gate and wept aloud. "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom. If only I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." The cry shook the palace. Victory lay at Israel's feet, but the king's grief overshadowed triumph. The father's heart drowned out the warrior's glory. Pause here. What do we see? David, the man after God's heart, broken not by giants, nor by enemies, but by the rebellion of his own son. Sin's consequences ripple beyond our own lives, reaching into the lives of those we love. Yet even here, God's mercy remains. Perhaps you, too, carry wounds from family betrayal, estrangement, pain you cannot mend. Know this, David's God is your God. The same Lord who walked with him through caves and valleys walks with you through heartbreak. And his promise remains. He is near to the brokenhearted and saves those crushed in spirit. The rebellion was over. Absalom was gone. David was restored to Jerusalem, his throne secure once more. But the scars remained, etched in his heart. The shepherd king had faced lions, giants, and armies. Yet his deepest lessons came from grief, repentance, and grace. And still, David's journey was not finished. More trials would come, more songs would be written, and more glimpses of the Messiah would shine through his story. Jerusalem once again echoed with the steps of its king. David had returned, not as the triumphant youth who slew giants, but as an older, scarred man, marked by loss, humbled by failure, yet still carried by the mercy of God. His throne was secure, but his days were shaded by the memory of rebellion, betrayal, and the cost of sin. Still, God had not finished writing his story. Through the twilight of his reign, David would encounter new challenges, unrest among his people, the temptation of pride, and the burden of preparing for the future beyond his life. One of David's deepest desires was to build a house for the Lord, a permanent temple where God's name would dwell. But God had spoken, "You shall not build a house for my name, for you are a man of war and have shed blood. But your son will build it, and I will establish his throne forever." Though denied this dream, David did not sulk. Instead, he prepared with all his strength. He gathered materials, cedar from Lebanon, stone cut by skilled hands, iron in abundance, bronze beyond measure. He organized the Levites, planned the divisions of priests, stored up treasures for the temple that would be built after his death. His hands could not construct it, but his heart would shape its vision. This is faith, to labor for promises you will not see fulfilled in your lifetime, trusting that God's plan extends beyond your years. Yet even in his later reign, weakness found David. One day, Satan incited him to take a census of Israel and Judah. Against Joab's counsel, David commanded, "Go, number the fighting men." Pride stirred perhaps a desire to measure his strength, to glory in numbers rather than in the God who had delivered him countless times. When the count was finished, David's conscience struck him. "I have sinned greatly in what I have done. Now, O Lord, I beg you, take away the guilt of your servant. I have done a very foolish thing." God sent Gad the prophet with a choice of judgment, 3 years of famine, 3 months of fleeing before enemies, or 3 days of plague. David bowed, trembling. "I am in deep distress. Let us fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great, but do not let me fall into human hands." So the plague swept the land. 70,000 fell. The angel of the Lord stretched out his hand toward Jerusalem to destroy it, but God relented. "Enough. Withdraw your hand." The angel stood by the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. There, David fell face down. "I have sinned," he cried. "I, the shepherd, have done wrong. These are but sheep. What have they done? Let your hand fall on me and my family." Gad instructed David to build an altar on that threshing floor. Araunah offered it freely, but David replied, "No, I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing." He paid the price, built the altar, and offered sacrifices. The plague stopped. That place, the threshing floor of Araunah, would later become the site of Solomon's temple. Out of judgment rose redemption, and even in failure, God wove his purposes. Pause here. Have you ever been tempted to measure your worth by numbers, achievements, wealth, followers, strength? David learned that dependence on numbers leads to destruction, but dependence on God leads to mercy. Perhaps today, God calls you to lay down your pride and build an altar of trust, costly yet holy. David grew older. His hair silvered, his steps slowed. Yet his voice, his harp, and his prayers still burned with devotion. The psalms he composed in these years shimmer with reflection. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." His eyes looked beyond battles and palaces toward eternal dwelling. Though he had known valleys of death, betrayal, and loss, he had also tasted God's unchanging goodness. But the kingdom still needed order. As David weakened, turmoil rose again. Adonijah, another of his sons, exalted himself, saying, "I will be king." With chariots and horsemen, with 50 men running before him, he declared his claim. Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba came to David, reminding him of the promise. Solomon, their son, was chosen by God to reign after him. Summoning strength, David commanded, "Take Solomon, my son, place him on my mule, and anoint him king at Gihon. Let the trumpet sound. Long live King Solomon." The city roared with celebration. Adonijah's plot crumbled. God's will prevailed. David's end drew near. He gathered his son Solomon, speaking words of charge and blessing. Imagine the scene. The aged king, frail yet radiant with faith, looking into the eyes of the son who would continue the promise. "I am about to go the way of all the earth," he said, Be strong. Show yourself a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in his ways. Keep his decrees and commands, his laws and requirements, as written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live and walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. The mantle passed. The shepherd's staff had long ago become a scepter, and now it would rest in Solomon's hand. Soon after, David rested with his ancestors. He was buried in the city of David. His reign had spanned 40 years, 7 in Hebron, 33 in Jerusalem. His life had been marked by triumphs and tragedies, failures and faith. Yet through it all, one truth remained. He was a man after God's own heart. Not because he was perfect, but because he turned back, again and again, to the God who anointed him, forgave him, and sustained him. And from his line came the greater Son of David, Jesus, the Messiah, who would reign forever, whose throne would never end, whose mercy would reach to the ends of the earth. David's story, full of dust and glory, weakness and worship, points us to him. The shepherd who became king reminds us of the shepherd who became our Savior. And you, what about your story? Do you feel small, overlooked, like a shepherd among giants? God sees your heart. Do you feel broken by failure? God restores. Do you stand in the wilderness of waiting? God is shaping you. Do you weep from betrayal, loss, or guilt? God draws near. The God of David is your God. His mercy is greater than your sin, his presence nearer than your fear, his promise stronger than your doubt. This is the legacy of David, a boy with a sling, a king with a crown, a sinner with a broken heart, a worshiper with an eternal song. His psalms still rise, his story still breathes, and his God still reigns.